Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor, along with Rick Brewing. As always, it's presented by Blake, the Attorney Mason. We got a lot to get to. We've got, obviously, Bengals in the NFL. We got college football. We got the start of college basketball beginning in earnest on Monday. We got a couple of lists and Ask Skinny anything I want to get to, among other things. I got a list emailed to me, Rick, and I've got those lists put together. So looking forward to that portion of the podcast as well. And of course, we got our gambling segment in which we probably both suck this week, and I'm here for all of that.
Yeah, it was a bad football weekend in the city of Cincinnati, Skinny, but that's okay because it is time for our college basketball preview episode. We're going to start with the college basketball season because it does tip off on Monday night. Actually, there will be some games in the afternoon, but all the local teams will play Monday night.
I mean, literally all the local teams are playing on Monday. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's great. The slate's going to be fun. Everyone will be in action, so you won't have to wait to get a taste of your team on the floor. And Skinny, last year we did something that I actually got decent feedback on. We kind of just went team by team, gave like a strength, a weakness based on our sort of general observations from this offseason and preseason. And we just rolled through it like that. So we'll start with Cincinnati. They were picked 6th out of 16 in the Big 12. Kansas, of course, was picked 1st this year, although I don't think that's as solidified as it maybe has been in the past. But just going with a strength and a weakness for this UC team based on what we know. Where would you go with that?
Yeah, but by the way, they supposedly, I guess, lost their secret scrimmage to Pitt, and there's different reports that Pitt may have played a tighter rotation. That's why I don't take anything away from a lot of those things. So I'm sure UC fans have taken some bad things away from that. I wouldn't. Before I get that, I mean, Rick, I know you probably heard the same thing I did along those lines. Those secret scrimmages, again, you just don't know what each coach is trying to get out of it.
Right, exactly. And there's also a lot of times, like, for instance, Xavier played Notre Dame in a secret scrimmage. They played 4 periods of 12 minutes, which isn't a normal college game. They reset the score at the end of each period. Right. And each period had kind of a different tone or objective of what each coach was going to do. Like, for instance, maybe one time they were working on different defenses. Maybe another time they're like, let's play the bench, get the young guys in there. So it's not a typical game, and you don't worry too much about the box scores from these secret scrimmages.
Yeah, I just want to get that part out of the way real quick. Yeah, so I think the strength for UC is there are multiple options on offense. There's multiple guys who can score. They've got multiple shooters now. The weakness, though, to me is who's the one that's going to do it at the end of a game? Who's the guy that or the end of a shot clock even, who's the guy, end a shot clock, end a game, end a half, whatever, is your bucket getter? Is it Jizzle? Is it Skillings? Is it Simas Lukosius? Is it somebody else? I think, again, that's not an awful weakness to have, in my opinion, but I do think it is a weakness, especially when in the Big 12, there are going to be multiple times you're going to have a guy into shot clock, make a play, into games. I mean, how many tight games did UC play last year? And the way the Big 12 is structured, I think we're going to see tight games for almost every team night in and night out. You'll have your blowouts here and there, but that league is kind of built for that. So, again, I think they have multiple options. To me, though, is who's the guy when push comes to shove goes and gets that bucket for you?
We're right on the same wavelength here, Skinny, because what I had down was lack of top-end talent. And you look at the ESPN Top 100 players that just got released this past week, there were 20 different Big 12 players featured in that Top 100. 0 of them came from Cincinnati. So, I mean, now, could you say maybe a Jizzle James guy is right outside the top 100 or Dan Skillings? Like, maybe they're those types of players that they're close, but I think that still says something about where UC's roster is at. Now, it would be much more concerning to me if they didn't have guys that you were confident in. I mean, the good thing is they do have multiple guys that can give you something on offense. It's just maybe not a clear-cut go-to guy, best player on the offensive end. Now, in terms of strength, I think defense and offensive rebounding are 2 things that when I look at this starting lineup, I mean, I think just inside, Dylan Mitchell and Aziz Bandaogo are both going to be tough on the offensive glass. But then you also have Dan Skillings playing like the 2 guard for him, basically coming and crashing from the perimeter. That's 3 dudes right there that can really get after it on the offensive glass and cause problems. So I think that's something that's going to be kind of sneaky about this UC offense.
And I want to be clear because my take was not well received about Aziz Bandaogo last year not being a difference maker, and Rick, he clearly wasn't. But I do think the strengths of what he can bring this team is exactly what they need, because they've got enough. They don't need him to be anything on offense other than a tip dunker, a stick back guy, a rim runner maybe in transition, and that's all fine. But if he can do the thing, go get you 8 to 10 rebounds a night, 2 block shots a night, 8 to 10 points just on dirty stuff. Perfect. Yeah,
I mean, he fits with the style they're going to play. Now, they have a big imposing center that they're going to throw the ball to a lot on the block and let him go to work against other teams? No, not really. But I think for their style with their defense and the speed and tempo they want to play at, I think that he really fits in well. And same with Dylan Mitchell. Both of those guys will sort of both embody that style of play. Xavier was picked third out of 11 teams in the Big East. What would you say strength-wise for this Xavier team?
Again, I'll go with just the offensive end in general. I mean, especially with Zach Freemantle being back, I think it's going to be a hard team to guard. The problem for me is how good are they going to be defensively, and will they be able to rebound, and who does rebound for them? Those are the ones for me. And maybe the Traore thing is what's got me thinking those, because I think that was going to be his role. Can Zach Freemantle give you anything on the defensive end? Because even a healthy Zach Freemantle was a liability on the defensive end. Now a surgically repaired Zach Freemantle, what's that going to look like on the defensive end?
Yeah, Lassina Traore, you mentioned, lost for the season to an ACL injury. He had transferred over from Long Beach State, and he was going to be their starting center. He was going to be their best defensive player in the post. He was going to be their best rebounder in the post. It's a big loss. Now, he's not a big scorer. He wasn't going to be a big part of their offense, I don't think. But to your point, the thing that they kind of are lacking now is exactly what he would have brought. So my biggest concern is the center position. To your point, like Zach Freemantle has clearly been better at the power forward spot than the center spot. Offensively, you'll be fine there, but defensively, rebounding, getting in foul trouble, matching up with opposing centers, all of those things become a concern now, I think, without the added depth and toughness that Traore would have brought to this team. I'm with you on the strength, though. It's multiple scoring options. The 3-point shooting, the multiple guys they have that can knock it down and get you 15 points on any given night. I think they've got 3-4 legitimate guys that can do that, maybe more.
We asked this question, I think, last year. Would Sean be willing to play much zone?
I'll never believe it until I see it. I just don't think he believes it in his heart of hearts as much as he may want to and practice it and acknowledge that maybe we need a change up. I don't think he'll ever commit to a zone defense. But that being said, I do think they will play small ball with Jerome Hunter at the 5 spot a lot. Yeah. And I like that look against Dayton. I don't know how good Dayton's going to be with Zed Key in there at the center spot. But defensively, I mean, Jerome Hunter knows their system like the back of his hand, and he can really move his feet against ball screens.
And again, you're going to know this way better than I will. Give me how many, I don't even want to say dominant bigs. How many capable scoring bigs are there in the Big East that worry you?
Now, that's a really good point to bring up, Skinny, because last year, this was a much bigger issue for Xavier than I think it will be this year. I mean, just use UConn as the best example.
Right,
last year, you've got Donovan Clingan that you've got to deal with, who's maybe the most dominant center in the nation except for Zach Edey. And this year, it's like Samson Johnson was 6'10", 220-ish, averaged 5 points a game last year, not a big offensive threat. And their backup for him, or potentially the guy that's going to compete with him for that starting job as the season goes on, is Terrace Reed, a transfer from Michigan that Michigan didn't seem too all enamored with and wasn't fighting too hard to keep him there. So, I think in general, the teams that you really worry about are Creighton with Ryan Kalkbrenner, and then I guess probably Villanova with Eric Dixon. And he's not a 6'10" guy. He's 6'8" and more skilled and below the rim, if anything. So it's a better year to have a limited center position and post depth for the Musketeers, I would say, in the Big East. And then NKU was third out of 11 teams in the Horizon League. There are 2 teams picked ahead of them. Milwaukee and Purdue Fort Wayne picked as a tie for the top spot. The Norse picked right after them. What would you say strength and weakness for this NKU team?
I would go strength having Sam Vinson back. I saw some highlight tape of him from what looked like a practice. He looked as good as new. And I just think he's a difference maker. Another year older, another year, wiser, all those things. Doesn't have a guy that's he had Marquez Warwick, who took a big scoring burden off of him, and rightfully so. And I would look for Sam to pick up a chunk of that slack, not all of it, but a chunk of it. And I guess, weakness, it feels like even at that level, is always depth and maybe not enough scoring punch that you could get off the bench.
Yeah, and I think they're improved in that area because that's been a real weakness for them. The most of Darren Horn's tenure here, they've never really had any depth.
But I think that's the case in a league like the Horizon. I really do. I mean, you're hoping to get competent guys to lead you to a league title, and you're just not going to get a ton of those because if they're really competent, they're playing somewhere else.
Yeah, the one unique thing about this NKU team, especially in the Horizon League and the mid-major level, is they actually do have a couple of guys that they've developed for a year or two that have been younger guys that didn't play as much that are now in the system. It's like, okay, Randall Pettis as a sophomore they're expecting a lot out of him, and he might come off the bench. I mean, that's a nice weapon to have coming off the bench in the Horizon League, a guy that could potentially be a Power 5 type of player, high major type of player. So I think they're a little bit better with their depth than they've been, but that's always a concern in the Horizon League, like you said. I would go strength, experience, and their defense is always really good. And this year they're even bigger and more athletic on the perimeter than they've ever been. As good as Marquez Warwick was for them over the last 4 years on the offensive end, he did give up something on the defensive end because he's a little bit slower, not as big, not as physical, not as aggressive. And in their defense, having a more like 6'4", 6'5" guard there at that spot that's more athletic will definitely be advantageous for them.
And for those that may not know, they play that matchup zone. I think it requires guys to probably be in the system for a bit, right? It requires a ton of communication, and part of that communication is, I trust you to, when I make a call, to go there. You're trusting me to go here. I'm trusting him to go there, and experience. I mean, if you're trying to do that with 5 new parts in a year, that would be really, really hard to get married up, to be honest with you.
Exactly. And there just aren't many Horizon League teams, period, that have 7, 8 guys coming back that you expect to contribute like NKU does. I mean, they lost Marquez Warwick, but that's it in terms of the guys that they were expecting to contribute this year. So, and then defensive rebounding is the weakness. They play that zone, so they're always one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the country.
But they got functional length, to your point. I think that's big. You don't have two tiny guards out there and a 6'4", 3 guy.
Yeah, and the thing is, I would say like rebounding isn't a concern at all in terms of their personnel because they have a huge front line with Horizon League. Yeah. Keena Tijere's 6'9", 6'10", and athletic. Trey Robinson is 6'8" and athletic. LJ Wells, all 3 of those could start if you wanted to. He's 6'7", 6'8", and athletic and strong and a really good rebounder. So they have the guys to do it, but when you play that style of defense that they play, they're 300-ish or lower every single year in defensive rebounding, and I think that'll again be the case this season. Kentucky, Skinny, they were picked to finish 8th out of 16 in the SEC this year. Where would you go strengths and weaknesses for this Mark Pope-led team?
I think strength is just style of play. I mean, he really put together a roster for his style of play of just having multiple shooters on the floor, having multiple defenders he can turn to when he has to turn to. And I think the weakness would be there's going to be a night where they just don't make shots. And the other part to it too is I think for them, much like you see, is who's the guy end of shot clock? That's the guy. Is it Jackson Robinson? Is it Carr? Is it even Lamont Butler, who's really not a scorer, but he's been through the wars of the NCAA tournament with San Diego State, deep into it, and made several key plays. I don't know if you saw this the other night. They played Minnesota, whatever it was,
Minnetonka or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see what his plus minus was?
I didn't. No, I watched the game, but I don't know his plus minus.
He was plus 41, and he played like 19 minutes.
Yeah, that's pretty hard to do.
It is.
It usually requires a exhibition against like a Division II team.
Sure, and I get that, but it still is. That's an insane number to me, which does tell you, I think, his value. It's not going to be in what he averages, points, whatever. I think he had 6 assists, 3 steals, 8 points. He's just going to do a little bit of everything. So I think it's really a deep roster. It's a roster that fits exactly the style of play he wants to play. But again, at the end of the game, end of the shot clock, all of those things, who's the guy? And I don't think we'll know for a while who that guy is. And maybe it'll turn out to be different guys at different times for all I know.
Yeah. And what are the hallmarks of that style of play? Ball movement and 3-point shooting. I mean, that's what UK fans have been clamoring for so long with Calipari. It never really got going. I mean, last year they did do more of that, but it still didn't work for them, and he couldn't get the personnel groupings right and all of that. This is what Mark Pope does. I mean, he specializes in this style of offense, and you're going to see this Kentucky team looks a lot different on the floor in terms of their personnel. They are not as impressive looking. They are not nearly as athletic. They've got 3, 4 white guys on the floor at a time sometimes out there, and it's just like, for Kentucky, it's different to see the way this group looks out there. But I agree with you. The lack of star power is a little concerning to me, just that a lot of games, I don't think they're going to have the best player on the floor. No. And also when they get into those big moments, it's like, okay, who's going to be the guy tonight? And I think that might change from night to night a little bit on this team. I also don't know if I love their center situation. I think that was probably highlighted a little bit in that exhibition because Amari Williams went out with an early injury and didn't return. I think Amari Williams is pretty solid. I don't know how good he is in the SEC, but then after him, when they start substituting, I don't know how much depth they have at that spot at all. So Brandon Garrison was okay, I thought, in that scrimmage, the exhibition, but I don't know that he's a guy that you want to rely on for a lot of production this year. That would be my biggest concern, I think, is the lack of star power in the center spot.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good point. And You know, I know people are excited with this, and probably the Kentucky fan with the rose-colored glasses is thinking, "Oh, maybe this could be a Final Four team." Listen, I don't know if they even have an NBA player on the roster. Maybe it's Jackson Robinson, maybe Andrew Carr because of his, kind of a specialty thing that he can do. Maybe be a 3-and-D guy, or at least a 3 guy, a stretch guy in the NBA. I don't think he is. I think it's kind of the same with UC. I like UC's talent. Do they have an NBA guy? Maybe they do. Maybe it's Jizzle. Maybe it's Dan Skillings. Maybe it's both. I just don't know. And let's face it, usually you better have at least one to go far in the tournament.
Yeah, I would agree with that. How many of these teams are going to make the tournament out of UC, Xavier, Kentucky, and NKU?
I'll say at least 3 of the 4, and NKU is the only one I toss out because it's a 1-bid league, right? And can they win the Horizon League tournament? Absolutely. That wouldn't be a shocker by any stretch. But I think the other 3 either win their conference tournament or get an at-large bid. I really believe that.
And you said that pretty confidently. It feels like it's been a few years since we could say that about all the local teams. And that's why I think this year is going to be really fun for fans in this area.
No question. And listen, I go back. We did this exercise when UC schedule went out. Dan Horde, myself, and Kelsey Conway. Kelsey does sideline reporting for UC home games, their non-conference games. And I hated to do it. I think I had him 0-5 out of the gate in the Big 12, but I did have him catch up to 10-10. And then there was like 4 non-conference games. Xavier was one of those that were kind of, you need to go 3-1 in those. And then if you go 10-10 in the Big 12, you're making it. And you're probably even going to be an okay seed if that's the case. And listen, can they exceed that? Absolutely. Again, I got them 0-5 out of the gate. They're probably winning 1 or 2 of those that I'm considering 0-5 out of the gate. That's I guess the beauty of the Big 12, like it or not, is you finish around the 500 mark and do well in your non-conference and don't slip up and have an awful loss. You're probably going to be rewarded with a decent enough seed to maybe play into the second weekend.
I want to talk about the coaching situations at each school just briefly, kind of check in on where things are at, what the temperament is of the fan base and the administration. We'll start with Wes Miller because he's probably one of the more interesting cases this year. I think he kind of won everybody over with what they did last year. It wasn't what they wanted, but it was closer. It was much better. They looked competitive in a very difficult Big 12 conference. They were this close to winning a bunch more games and being a legitimate tournament team and comfortably in there. What does he need to do this year? Is it just a matter of get to the tournament and everyone will feel really confident about where things are at?
Yeah, I mean, because you saw how close they were last year. You bring a chunk of it back. You feel like your roster's now better than that. And I think anything less than the tournament, barring, major catastrophic injuries, would be a disappointment. I do. And is it pitchforks and fire Wes Miller time at that point? No, you need to see the composite of how it got to whatever it got to. But I would think it would be disappointing for them not to make the tournament.
Let's throw out a scenario kind of like you just laid out where, okay, you lost maybe a game in the non-conference that you shouldn't have lost, and then you go 500 or a game under 500 in the Big 12 play, and you're right on the bubble. You don't get in. That good season, lots of close games again, kind of similar to last year's situation. Where are they at that point? Do you feel like regressing and sort of going the other way where they were before last season, where it's like Wes is on the hot seat again? Or has he done enough at this point and the recruiting's going well enough that people feel comfortable moving forward, even if this isn't a tournament year?
But then I would say, is the recruiting going well enough? Did you have the right players? Did you have enough good players? That's still on you. And so, yeah, I think it would be a complete hot seat scenario for him if they don't.
Yeah, and just to emphasize again, I think the buyout after this season would still be at least $13 million. And then the following season, still $10 million. So, I mean, he's not going to get fired within the next couple of years, and he shouldn't. I mean, he's got it moving in the right direction, but that's just always a part of the conversation when you get into this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a tournament team. I think it'll be a moot point.
I do too. I think it's a tournament team, and I think people right now, are pretty positive on Wes Miller. And if this team makes the tournament, then I think they'll feel good about it.
They are, but I'm guessing there's people squirming after the Pitt loss for whatever reason, because everybody was so high after the Ohio State game. And part of it was you got to see it, right? You didn't see the Pitt game, and so that makes you a little uneasy. But I would just say just throw it out the ringer and wait till you see them play.
But that's the thing. Like, you saw them, and you saw them against Ohio State.
Right.
There was a game you wanted them to perform well, and it was that one. That's the one that felt real, and they looked great. So I wouldn't be worried about a UC fan based on the preseason. I would actually be more optimistic based on what they've seen so far.
Yeah.
Sean Miller, my take on this, I think he's more solidified at Xavier than he's been since he returned, because we went through last year's coaching carousel where like an Ohio State opened up, where a Michigan opened up, and he didn't really seem to be all that close to getting any of them or making a move. At this point, I think he's pretty locked into Xavier for the foreseeable future. I mean, Xavier obviously has no interest in him leaving, and I think he's good where he's at for right now.
I think he is too. And, maybe it's a case, Rick, again, he took a bite at the Big Apple with Arizona and had success to a point. Excuse me. And then obviously things went haywire and he wound back up in a comfortable place where he knows how to have success, has had success, is likely going to have success again, making plenty of money doing all those things. Again, it's a never say never, right? I mean, the right job opens up for the right amount of money. You're never not going to say never, but at some point, maybe you are just comfortable in a situation. And it feels like that's the spot for him right now.
Well, and there were rumblings when the Ohio State job opened up last year. They fired Chris Holtman and
right.
Jake Diebler took over as intern, but it wasn't clear that he was going. In fact, most people believed he was not going to get the head coaching job when it first happened. Sean's name got brought up a lot. And there were some rumblings at Xavier that like, hey, as much as he is appreciative of Xavier, there may be some things that aren't all good here behind the scenes because Xavier is in a budget crisis and they haven't been as quick to do a few things around the program. And in terms of spending money, that maybe he's not, as comfortable as people would like to think at Xavier. I guess in this current climate where it's constantly an arms race to pay players through NIL, to upgrade everything to where transfers want to come there when you hit the portal in the spring. That is, I guess, the only concern you have as a Xavier fan is if he finds out like last year's strategy of building a roster in the NIL transfer portal era didn't work for him with the younger guys and the international guys. This year he's going older, nothing but experienced players, no freshmen on the roster. If this doesn't work this year, doing it this way all of a sudden, and he still feels like maybe Xavier's not quite doing enough, at some point does he just get frustrated with it? I think that's really the only concern you have as a Xavier fan. And I would put that concern pretty low. Like in terms of the level of it, it's out of a 10, it's maybe like a 1.5 or a 2 right now.
Yeah, no, that's probably right. But yeah, I go back to, again, he's done it before. It's not like he doesn't have a track record of success. And yeah, maybe feeling through the NIL era is a bit different than his previous stint at Xavier, where you were bringing in recruits and nurturing recruits and all those things. But I think he's a smart enough guy and a good enough coach to eventually navigate his way through it just fine.
I do too. And I think this strategy that he's using this year will work. I mean, it looks really good here in the preseason, and the practices have been much better than they were a year ago when they were inexperienced and all of that. So I think it's going to work, but just kind of as like a big picture thing, you could see going down the line where if he's like, wait, maybe transfer portal NIL era just doesn't work at a place of this size in this conference or something like that. But I think that concern is pretty far off still. Now at NKU with Darren Horn, I mean, I think the concern is the same every year, right? If they win another conference tournament and they go back to the NCAA tournament, that's where you get concerned about potentially losing them, right? That's always a concern at this level.
Yeah, and honestly, Rick, they've probably maxed out what they can pay him, right?
I would think so. Yeah, he's
even at that, even if a bigger school came calling, you weren't going to be able to match that anyways. That's probably a moot point too. I go back to though, is he one of those ones? He cycled through, right? He was the guy on the way up and things didn't work out at South Carolina. He's kind of worked his way back into a head coaching job. Is he the guy that says, I'd like to have one more challenge, one more big payday? Can't blame him if he is. Or do you go, you know what? I'm making enough money. I'm comfortable. We're going to win. I'm going to get players here, and I'm good with it. I've already taken that swing at it, and it was a stressful 5 years, even though I got paid. And maybe not. Maybe it's, hey, stressful 5 years, but now I'm getting paid, kind of retirement money, if you will. I'm going to go take a swing at this and see if I can get the job done. Maybe do things differently. I don't know. I guess it is always a worry, and understandably so.
I think it could be both for him too, right? Like he might be happy with where he's at, and this is great. But at the same time, if you're a competitive college basketball coach and you got one swing at the highest level, but it was at a school that didn't support you at all, doesn't care about basketball, is a place where coaches go to die, basically. Would you like to have it at a legitimate high major school where you're really competing with the big boys and doing it the right way with an administration that's supporting you and backing you? That might be interesting to someone in his position. I would totally understand that. But again, that really all comes down to NKU has to make an NCAA tournament. And if that happens, I don't think there's going to be an NKU fan that's upset. I mean, it's one of those great situations where the only way you lose your coach is if the best possible thing happens to you.
No, I mean, and if NKU is a stepping stone program, which it probably is for just about every, John Brandon took the UC job after NKU. Darren Horn, if he takes another job, it's because they've had success, and it proves that, hey, maybe this is as much program related as anything else, that you're in a really good area to get kids to come to in a nice facility. And I'm not here to tell you that it doesn't matter who the coach is. It always matters who the coach is, but that, hey, multiple coaches, we're still going to have success.
Yeah, and the good thing, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was kind of like Xavier, right? Like, that like you said, that it does matter who the coach is, but you get good candidates because the candidates know that that's a good place to have success at. That's how they got Darren Horn. And so I think that's definitely the case, where if you go to another tournament, you're going to get more good candidates, and hopefully they would make a good decision from there. But for right now, I mean, everything's going really well with Darren Horn. It seems like he's pretty pleased with the current situation. And then finally, Mark Pope at Kentucky. I guess the question is, what constitutes a successful first season? The standard is always so high there. What does he need to do in year one?
I would say at least win an NCAA tournament game and don't lose to a lower seed. I mean, honestly, I think that's where the bar is at the moment. That's where Cal left the bar. The honeymoon can end very quickly, as you know, for a Kentucky coach. The first night that they play a team in the league and they go 6 for 34 on threes, it'll be, boy, this style of play sucks. Well, trust me, there's going to be one of those nights, man.
Quit shooting the three.
Quit shooting the three. It's gonna happen. This is a BYU team that won by 20 at Kansas and still lost a chunk of games and had a bad loss in the NCAA tournament, for goodness sake. So, I think at least get to the end. If you got to the second weekend, the Sweet 16, that would constitute a really successful season, in my opinion. Anything above that's complete gravy.
And by the way, this would also mark Mark Pope's first ever NCAA tournament win.
That's a good call. Yes.
He's never won one yet. So it's like the standard is you have to win at least one and to keep the fans off your back. And he's never done that yet. So I think he should at Kentucky, but it's going to be an interesting season to follow. I do think he'll have a little bit more leeway with the fan base because he's a former player, because they're taking to him so quickly and they really like him. Feel like there's maybe a little bit of honeymoon that extends. Okay, you get to the tournament this year, you lose that game. Some people are going to be griping, but for the most part, everyone's going to be supportive and really excited about year two. But after that, I mean, it's on. You better be really good by year two.
It's on.
All right. Just wrapping up here with the odds to win the conference regular season in their respective conferences. NKU has the best odds out of these teams at 4-1 to win the Horizon League.
That's regular season or tournament?
This is to win the conference regular season.
Okay, gotcha.
Xavier 6.5 to 1 to win the Big East this year. Kentucky 18-1 to win the SEC. Hard to believe that number being next to Kentucky's name. And then Cincinnati is 25-1 to win the Big 12 this year. Do you like any of those odds that you would be interested in?
I like both Xavier and UK just for the value alone. I mean, the SEC can cannibalize each other. And if this Kentucky style of play, if maybe they never have an off shooting night, they win some games they weren't supposed to win because they shoot it so well. That's a pretty good value in my opinion. I know there are teams with better talent in the league for sure. And probably for where they're picked in the league, that's probably accurate. But honestly, it's such an unknown because of all the new guys on this roster and what they're doing from a style of play perspective. I like their value and I like Xavier's value. I don't like NKU's value at 4-1, even though I think, they got a shot to win it. And I just think for UC, it's really going to be hard to, I'm looking 10-10, 11-9. That's not going to win the league. And I think that would still constitute a really good year in the Big 12 for UC.
All right, let me do the homer thing. I think 4-1 for NK. I think NKU should be considered as much of a favorite as anyone in that conference. Okay. Purdue Fort Wayne just got their doors blown off by Notre Dame in a secret scrimmage. It could have been over 50 if they would have wanted it to be. I think NKU, a team that has a really good chance to win their conference at 4-1. This is the regular season, mind you. They don't have to win the conference tournament. To win the regular season, to get them at 4-1 odds, that's pretty tough to find in any conference. So I would actually like NKU the best out of those. Here's what I don't understand. And I remember bringing this up last year to you too. It doesn't make any sense to me. The odds to reach the Final Four. Kentucky is 18-1 to win the SEC regular season. What do you think their odds are to reach the Final Four?
I'll say 30.
9-1.
What?
They're 18-1 to win the SEC. They're 9-1 to reach the Final Four. And I promise you this is accurate. I went over it 15 times because it didn't make sense to me.
What SEC teams have better odds? Or lower odds, I should say.
To reach the Final Four?
Yeah, Bama's got to be in that group somewhere.
Yeah, I can pull them up here. I don't have the full list.
I mean, I can't imagine there's a whole lot of teams that have lower odds than that. There's some, I'm sure. Yeah.
Here we go. Let's share the screen so you can see it.
Okay. We gotta spell it out so we can see it too, or for people who are not watching.
Yep.
All right, here we go. It's popping up. All right, so Duke is like 1.5 to 1. UConn's 2 to 1.
And this says to reach the Final Four 2025. You see that, correct?
I hate the value for all of those. Bama's 2 to 1.
Yeah, so Bama's the SEC team with the lowest odds.
Boy, no offense, these odds are terrible.
I know. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. Auburn is 420 plus 420. No. Arkansas is plus 650.
Okay, so there are a chunk of teams inside the league that are below them, but these odds for all these, like Creighton 9.5, Texas Tech 9. No, I don't like any of them.
I know, and this is the same. I mean, UC is 15 to 1 to reach the Final Four. Something they must have messed this up. I mean,
that has to be on a $10 bet, doesn't it? No, I guess it's not. It's a $100 bet. Yeah, it's that. Yeah, that's messed up. That's not right.
That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
I can see some of that as of odds to make the tournament.
These are odds to reach the Final Four.
Oh, I saw it. It's
9 to 1, Cincinnati 15 to 1, Xavier 19 to 1. Again, I don't know why anyone would bet on any of those. Ever.
I agree. Ugh. Yeah, I'm with you.
All right. Any final thoughts there on the college basketball segment?
No, we got to get through the slog of November, if you will, to some degree. There's a good game here and there across the board, but as we know, November can just be a bunch of directional schools that don't really tell you the story of your team, and we'll always have an overreaction either way, depending on a great performance against one of those teams or one of those performances that teams turn in, because it just is what it is. And just always remember, the team you see in November, either good or bad, is not the team you're going to see anywhere close to January or February.
But it's just beautiful that it is back.
There you go.
All right, Bengals time. You guys talked to Zach Taylor, Lou Anarumo, and Dan Pitcher this week, Skinny. So after conversing with the head coach and both coordinators, what came out of all of that? What was your big takeaway from this moment? Where are they at with all of this? Yeah, so
it was interesting because it all felt like it had the same feel of like, we're going to get better. We believe in these guys, and we believe in what we're doing. And, we have the right guys in that locker room. And, asking Dan Pitcher about the run game, we're just a tick off here or there. We're going to get better. Are you? I mean, are you? I get it. I don't expect them to go, hey, we suck and I quit. We're going to quit on the sea. I get some of that. So I'm not blaming them for what they said, but it just all had the feel of grasping it. Boy, I sure hope we do what we used to do, because I've got guys that used to do it. Well, used to doesn't make a damn bit of difference at the minute. It's in the past.
Well, is that maybe the takeaway, that they don't have an answer? That the answer is we're just hoping it gets better at some point?
Yes. And I don't mean that like, well, they're coaches, they need to have an answer schematically. I think they've tried a lot of things. And a lot of it, I mean, the run game isn't working at the moment. Can we blame Frank Pollock? Sure. I blame whoever you want to blame as a fan. That's fine. But you know what? And again, I wrote this about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think they're paying for some bad drafts. I mean, right now on defense, if I took away Trey Hendrickson, give me a dude on that defense, a guy that you go, that's the guy. That's a guy on that defense.
What's happened to Logan Wilson? Everyone was talking him up so much last year. He hasn't made any plays really this year, hardly.
Right. Take off Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and you can't do that. But again, those are two players. That's it. They're two guys, and you hear that. Well, they've got Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Great. They're not winning games by themselves. And I just think for whatever reason, the roster just either got old in some spots. The young guys haven't bubbled up. The old guys have gotten older, and you have the confluence of where we're at, which is not a very good football team. And you can say, well, they almost beat Baltimore. If it wasn't for a bad snap and hold, give you that. Well, if not for a penalty on a rookie, they beat Kansas City. I'll give you that. But the 4 games that they've played against the 4 what would be playoff teams at the moment, Baltimore, Kansas City, Washington, and then Philly, you're 0-4. 2 were maybe unlucky. I might give you some of that, but then I'll flip it on its head of, you didn't exactly wow in the 3 wins against 3 bad teams either, in Carolina, Cleveland, and the Giants. So I think you're stuck with, this isn't a good football team. Prove me wrong. Win this week against the Raiders and at least win one of the 2 before the bye at Baltimore or at the Chargers. Sweep all 3 and you can make me a believer. But right now, it's hard for me to believe in this team in the roster, because I keep watching defensive backs get turned around in coverage. I watch no pass rush. I watch teams run the ball at will. I see the offense that can't run the ball, can't find a receiver outside of T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And then unfortunately, T doesn't play. And the other receivers, other than Jamar Chase, the other wide receivers had 8 targets and 2 catches. They're 0-3 when T doesn't play. That's kind of a glimpse into maybe the future without T. I hate to be doom and gloom. I really do, because I've tried to be optimistic, and I really thought there were some strides forward defensively in the Giants and Browns game. But then you played another good offense, and they owned you. They owned you. Think about this. They punted 1 time. Washington didn't punt a single time. That's 2 of your last 3 home games. You gave up. They punted 1 time. That screams of just absolute horrifying roster.
Yeah, it's pathetic. And I did Mo Eggers' show at B-Dubs out in Anderson this week to do college basketball talk. But before me, Paul Daner was on his show. He was out there as well. So I was sitting there listening to Paul beforehand, and everything you just said reminded me of something that Paul said that day. And I thought it was really well put, where he said, as bad as this feels right now, this season feels more salvageable than the future of this team does all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. When you think about like the Kansas City game and the way that unfolded, and some of the Baltimore, the close losses that they've had, it's like, well, they're close enough that they might be able to fix those things and win a couple more games this year and remain competitive, maybe even sneak into the playoffs. But to your point about like the defense, Skinny, and who is good aside from Trey Hendrickson, Paul was saying, who do you build around on this defense going forward? Who do you want to stick around and be like the building block of the foundation of this defense in the next 3 years? There's not one guy that you would say that about. That's a real concern. Trey Hendrickson, sure, for 1 more year, he's going to bitch about the money you're paying him going in next year. You're not going to give him any more, and then he's going to be gone after that. And who knows how good he's going to be going forward. He was terrible this past week. So
yeah, Fred Johnson owned him.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that as bad as this feels right now, we might be in a spot where we just need to enjoy and hold on to hope T. Higgins stays healthy and hope that he and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are enough to pull this team through and get them into the playoffs and make something happen, because after this year, it starts looking even more bleak.
Yeah, so let's just say they pay Jamar, and it's going to be a pretty penny if they do, and choose not to pay T, or just think they have to put their finances elsewhere. You know what you're going to need after this year in all likelihood? You're going to need a center. And I don't know if that's clinging to hope for a 7th-round draft pick to suddenly be the center and Matt Lee. Maybe it is. But you're going to need a center in all likelihood. Maybe you get another year out of Ted Karras. They did extend him. And obviously that's probably the answer to it. But it's not like Ted's a Pro Bowl player. He's a okay player. Alex Kappa has not had a good year at guard. The wide receiver situation, I know there's a lot of hope. At least there's more hope now about Jermaine Burton than there has been, but he's got 2 catches all year, and they still, he still didn't get targeted very much in the snaps he was on the field. It's great that, they think he's making strides, and at least he's got his head in his playbook and he's doing better things in practice. That's good to hear, but I see better than I hear. And what I see right now is the guy's caught 2 goal balls on the season, and that's it. Hopefully it's something different moving forward. I do think you've kind of found a tight end in Eric All, some of that, but yes, back to the defense. Your linebackers are going to be another year older. You probably BJ Hill probably won't be around. Then the jury's out on your rookies and Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, and Sheldon Rankins he's been okay. He was not very good this last game. He was okay the previous 2 games, but again, he's a veteran long in the tooth. Listen, I give Miles Murphy a little bit of rope because he's just come back from injury. But he hasn't exactly stood out to this point in the handful of games that he's played, and he's a 1st-round draft pick. Your corners are a disaster at the moment, and I thought that felt solidified. You have to go sign a veteran corner in this offseason. You have to remake the safety room because Von Bell clearly looks his age, and Geno Stone has been horrific. So you got a lot of pieces to fix, and maybe not a lot of money to do it with, and you sure haven't done it through the draft of late. And again, that sounds complete Debbie Downer, but I wish the front office would prove me wrong.
In terms of the offense this year, getting it back on track, fixing that side of things, is it as simple as they just need T. Higgins to be healthy? That's where all their wins have come from. Their numbers are exponentially better when he's on the field. Is it that simple?
I think it is. I'd like to get Orlando Brown back to full health because Cody Ford, he's not a parking cone. I'll give him that. But, if you face it, Yeah. If you face a quality pass rusher, you're always going to have to max protect and help on his side. And so that takes somebody else out from protecting other places. I mean, if I got to put Zach Moss over there every time, who's picking up the free runner up the middle on a blitz, right? I mean, so you've got that issue. I'd like for Orlando to get healthy, and, maybe it's sitting this week, and because of the short week next week, you give them a little bit extra time to get ready for Baltimore. That doesn't mean you're throwing this game away, but again, the guy's going out of the last two games at the same time in the first half, basically with the same injury. So there's an issue there that it keeps cropping up. I appreciate him trying to play through it, but he obviously can't. So to your point, I do think it's that, but I think they've got to either find something in the running game, or you got to get whoever that third receiver is, Jermaine Burton, whatever, that guy's got to start doing something too, and give them a little more, because even with T back the previous two games, and again, I know, listen, Cleveland's got a nice defense. Giants got a good defensive front, all those things. You had T in those two games, and yes, you won them, but you didn't win them because your offense was great. You won them actually because the other two teams' offenses sucked. So it is to some degree, Rick, because again, the numbers don't lie. They're 0-3 without him, 3-2 with him. I think that kind of speaks for itself a little bit. And T did make plays in both of those games, too. So there's that. But I just think that there's still something else missing. Maybe it is the running game, and I don't know how to fix it at this point. And I'm asking questions the other day. There doesn't seem to be an answer other than we're just a tick off. It's a block here. It's a cut back there. Okay, I heard this last year. And listen, I think they made the right move letting Joe Mixon walk, because Joe Mixon's advanced metric numbers suggested he wasn't a right fit in this offense. He didn't break tackles. He didn't make people miss. He's doing great in Houston. Good for him. But I don't think it would be a difference here. So I don't think they made a wrong move there either. Is it Frank Pollock who's the run game coordinator, offensive line?
How does he have a job at this point? I'm sorry, but it makes zero sense for that guy to still be employed. If you're looking to try to get any type of,
but here's the thing: if Zach doesn't believe that that's the issue, that it is just we're a tick off here. Again, I'm just taking it
we've been a tick off in the run game for 3 straight years.
That's a fair point. There's no doubt. That's an absolute fair point, and that's where I do think if this season does go somewhat haywire, I know Lou Anarumo's head's going to be called for. I don't think that's probably the right place to go. I do think there'll be a couple of sacrificial lamb assistant coaches, and that's what's going to have to take place.
And I don't even want, I'm not even clamoring for people to get fired, but it makes zero sense for Frank Pollock to still have a job, because Joe Mixon in itself is enough reason to be like, yeah, that guy sucked here the last 2 years, and looks like a monster playing for another team. I agree it wouldn't have been fixed here because Frank Pollock is still here, and potentially other people within the calling the plays, Dan Pitcher and Zach Taylor, might be the bigger issues as well there. But either way, you have to start changing something up with your running game, and I would start with the guy in charge of the running game.
Yeah, I was talking to Paul yesterday in the media room, and he was talking about his appearance on with Mo, and I guess Mo asked him at one point, was Zach Moss good in Indianapolis last year? And Paul said, I said, yeah. He goes, is Zach Moss good now? He goes, no. Was Joe Mixon good last year? No. Is Joe Mixon good this year? Yeah. I mean, there's a common thread.
There is. I mean, it's pretty obvious to someone looking at this objectively, and sometimes I just think you're too close to the situation to make the obvious decision there. Do you think back to the T Higgins thing, do you think him missing these games and the team struggling without him has made it more or less likely that he might be back with the Bengals next year?
I would like to say more likely, but again, Rick, for all the things I detailed that you have to fix, you can't ignore those problems, and it's going to take money to fix them. So, I mean, I guess you could say, well, we'll try to ball out with those 3 dudes and what else we got, and we'll try to win games 31-30. I just don't know if that's a formula for success. I just don't.
I think it's made it so that you absolutely positively cannot re-sign him going into next year, because it has exposed all these other glaring holes that you clearly are going to have to spend a lot of money to upgrade certain other positions. You either have to get a dominant pass rusher on defense or another offensive lineman.
I will say this. I will say if for whatever reason the light bulb goes off for Miles Murphy from here to the end of the season, and he shows why he was a first-round draft pick, maybe Cam Taylor-Britt recovers from this funk that he's in and shows why he was considered maybe a lockdown corner, and maybe DJ Turner. Again, I'm going maybes here. Don't get me wrong. I'm going maybes.
Big maybes.
Yeah, those are big maybes. But if those take place, then okay. Then, maybe you then have a different conversation. Okay, we don't have quite as much to fix, and maybe we should pay T.
But here's the other side of that, Skinny. He keeps getting injured. It hasn't been fixed. That was a concern last year about not re-signing him, as he's not reliable. This year's proved he can't stay healthy. I don't think you can consider it.
If you remember before the season started, Paul and Jay Morrison had their podcast at the BetMGM downtown, and all of us that are on the beat had different segments in it. And they did a segment with each of us when we were on of give me a player you're buying and a player you're selling. Unfortunately, I was buying stock in Cam Taylor-Britt, but I got booed for this. And I said, I'm going to get booed. I'm going to tell you who I said, I'm just selling T. Higgins. Because at the time when he cropped up on that injury list, it was the day we did that. I said, here we go again. And it's kind of here we go again. I mean, when he's healthy and plays, he's a good receiver, but you got to be healthy to play. And I think that's a concern for any team that signs him to big dollars.
Zach Taylor takes a lot of criticism, and that's just kind of the way it goes in the NFL. If you're the head coach and your team's not doing great, the sequence, though, everyone's referring to it as the 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 there that basically ended the game for the Bengals and was just a devastating moment. How bad of a look for Zach Taylor was that, where they turned it over on downs after that bubble screen to Jamar Chase, and on 3rd down, they just run it right into a pile and got nothing?
Well, the 3rd down run call was fine. It'd be nice if they could execute that portion of it to not put you in the 4th down, correct? I mean, that's a big part of it for me.
But at some point, you do have to start realizing, like, hey, we can't get a yard when we line up against
that's a fair point. So let's start with the decision. We'll go with the decision to go for it.
I'm fine with the decision.
No problem. Yeah. At that point in the game, that's where, in my mind, even I'm like, well, they're not stopping this offense. You can't get 2 scores down. You might as well just try to get this thing and even it back up and hope at some point that they have a miscue, and that's the only way because you're not stopping them. And of course they didn't the rest of the game. So that decision was the right decision to make, in my opinion. I understand the call. I'm going to tip my cap a little more to Philly, but also, and Zach said this too, I got to put us in a better call than throwing the ball 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. I think that's the part for me, is you start in a negative place on the catch. Listen, we've seen Jamar Chase run through tackles a billion times. I don't know if you remember the bubble screen the week before in Cleveland. He caught it, juked the guy. There's nobody blocking really. Juked the guy out and literally carried, I think, 4 or 5 tacklers, another 6 or 7 yards. So we've seen him do stuff like that before. And so you're trying to get your best guy on the run, one-on-one in space, where he's either got to make the guy miss or run through the tackle. I understand the call. I don't like the call, and I don't like throwing it behind the line of scrimmage. And I'll give him credit. He didn't bat an eyelash of making excuses for it. He said, I've got to put us in a better call. And that's the hindsight of it. Talking to Dan Pitcher, he kind of, he explained it pretty well of, the way this is executed is, you throw it to here. You don't expect that guy to get downhill as quickly as he did. He said he played it great, and you got your best player's hands on the ball, so you're expecting him to make a play, and the guy just out leveraged, just made a play. Again, I'm not trying to make excuses for it because I don't understand throwing the ball 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, but it's not like anybody ran away and hid from it. I mean, they all stood up and fessed up to, hey, we should have done something different.
Skinny, have you ever, I know you have because you're better. You put in a parlay sometimes and like you're getting into the weeds and you're like finding like, well, there's a 2nd leg and a 3rd leg and a 4th leg. And I like all these things, but at some point you just realize like, you know what? I should just pick one thing with longer odds instead of needing 4 different things to happen. That's kind of like what the Bengals are doing when they throw behind the line needed to gain on a 4th and short situation. It's like you're just adding one more variable that might go against you into the mix, another way for you to lose. If you throw it across the line needed to gain, yes, it might not work. Yes, they might make a good play. All those things can happen. But at least you're not going to execute the play, catch the pass, and still be freaking short of the line to get. I mean, it just makes no sense. And here's my issue with Zach Taylor, why I do think it's a pretty bad look for him. To do that and to explain it the way he did is the right way to handle it. The problem is he's done this multiple times, Skinny. He keeps telling us that, like, I screwed up on that one. I'd like to have that one back. That wasn't the right call. I should have thrown ahead 6. Well, Zach, you've done that about 15 times in your career, my man. So, like, why don't you quit throwing it short of the sticks on 4th and short? Eliminate it and quit apologizing for it,
That's a fair point. I would say this, though. I'm going to guess that, Rick, that was the play they highlighted for a 4th and 1 play. That literally, that's one that they repped during the week. That was the one that, hey, when we get to a 4th and 1 situation, here's our play call. So, again, it wasn't one I don't think he was searching down the play sheet going 4th and 1. Let's go with this. I think it's one they clearly highlighted because it's what they ran.
We've ripped a lot off from Paul Dana already this show, so let's continue on that trend real quick.
I like doing that.
He said something that I agree with and I really like, which the everyone was saying, well, why don't you just do the tush push like Philly does in that situation to get the short yardage? The Bengals almost have their own version of that, or something that is much more effective than throwing short of the sticks. And that is spread the field out as much as possible. Let Joe move the pocket to buy himself a little bit of time, and then let him pick apart your defense for 1 yard. You're going to be able to guard all those guys for 1 yard without Joe Burrow finding someone and dunking it, or finding an opening where you screwed up defensively and he's able to run it for himself, which he does very well in a situation like that. Let your best player make the decision and make the play. Let him execute. Don't put it in a situation where there's one option, and if they made a better play than your blocker, well, shoot, you just didn't get it,
Yeah. Or put Tanner Hudson in there at quarterback, and because he's a former quarterback, and let him run the tush push. I mean, he's got tight end size. I think part of the problem is I think you'd be afraid that the guard to guard guys would get blown up.
Well, I understand the idea of not wanting Joe to get hurt. He's not Jalen Hurts.
No.
I don't want Joe Burrow going under center and taking those rushes all the quarterback sneaks all the time.
I agree with that, because Dan Hort asked Dan Pitcher that question yesterday, and it wasn't, hey, you're an idiot for not doing this. He just said, why don't you like to sneak Joe Burrow? And he said, well, we've done it before. You've seen us do it before. Yeah, I have. I mean, I've seen it on 2nd and 1s where, the defense isn't bunched up in there and Joe does sneak forward, but it's a really soft, easy sneak to do. We're talking 4th and 1, man. That tush push is just a scrum of bodies. I don't need Joe Burrow in the middle of a scrum of bodies. I don't think any fan wants Joe Burrow in the middle of a scrum of bodies.
If you have Jalen Hurts, you have him to do things like that. Yes. He's that type of player because he's not the quarterback that Joe Burrow is. But you saw the Chiefs, they used to do that thing with Patrick Mahomes too, and he got injured doing it, and they stopped doing it.
Well, they started doing it with tight ends, though.
Exactly. But I mean, they're not going to do it with their franchise quarterback anymore, because you are putting them at risk, and that's completely understandable. One other thing that I completely forgot about, Hard Knocks is getting ready to go with this team. I mean, what a disaster this Hard Knocks season could end up being for fans.
Yeah, no question. Got that. You got the silly Simpsons alternate thing that's coming up. I mean,
I knew you would love that.
I'm over the silliness of this. I'm over just, what? I'm over the white outs and the green outs and the brown outs and the orange outs and the orange this and the black. I'm old. Just honestly, I know people in the fan experience, and it's going to sound awful because I don't go as a fan, but I would hope as a fan, I want my team to win more than I need a white out or green out, an orange out, a brown out. Orange is the color of power, and shut the hell up and find a way to have your front office get players to win games.
That was perfectly executed on your behalf.
Thank you.
Let's just move on to college football. I don't want to say anything else to ruin that moment. Cincinnati lost to Colorado 34-23. It was pretty much the shootout we were hoping for, especially early on in that game. But the Bearcat, really screwed up the end of that first half there and let that game get away from them. They're on a bye this week, so they'll be able to get themselves back on track here. But we mentioned last week there was concerns about the defense, concerns about not being able to put pressure on Shedeur Sanders. And that was exactly what happened. He's 25 for 30 for 323 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. That was basically that, and the end of the first half were the game.
Yeah, watching Colorado earlier this year, I thought it was going to turn into the flaming disaster I was expecting. And let me give Deion credit. I mean, that they're a good football team. They're not just the Sun and Travis Hunter, although the Sun and Travis Hunter are pretty damn good. And they got other dudes at receivers we talked about too. But Rob Livingston, who was the Bengals safeties coach the last few years, is the defensive coordinator there now. And that defense is actually, it's more than serviceable. It's not dominant by any stretch, but, they've had a good stretch of games, and they're a legit team. Tip of the cap. Now, again, I think we talked about this last week when we had the Ask Skinny Anything question of, did UC make the right move with Satterfield, or should they have hired Deion Sanders? I still don't know moving forward what's going to go on with that program and what he's going to do, but tip of the cap, they're a nice team.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the one thing people tend to forget about, and I was on the other side of it last week, I was arguing that, hey, I have concerns about what Colorado is going to look like after Shedeur and Travis Hunter are gone. But Deion hired good coaches. That was always, remember right away, he got big time coordinators. They paid him a lot of money. He hired a legitimate coaching staff around him. So it was never just him being like, I'm Deion and I'll figure it out, and this is going to be like a poorly organized situation. He has real legitimate coaches there. So I'm not entirely surprised by the fact that they have come together pretty well here. But Skinny, let's go back. It's tied 14-14 in the last 4 minutes of that first half. And then they go into the locker rooms down 24-14. you can't have that. And it feels like this constantly happens to this UC team, that they can't get the end of first halves right.
No, that's a fact, and that was always going to be a game that if you got 2 scores down and were going to chase, that was going to be very hard. It was going to be very hard, and obviously the second half they gave up 10 points, but it just never felt like if this got into a back and forth game, you can't get 2 scores behind. Yeah, you can't get 2 scores, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Now they have the bye week, which is nice, because what you don't want to have happen here is this to turn into a spiral at the end. You've had a good season. You've done well here, but it's not an easy slate to finish. You have to take care of business, starting with the home game against West Virginia. And then you've got another home game to end the season that you should win. But this West Virginia game at home is really big to finish off this season on a positive note.
Well, and last time they had a loss right before the bye was that loss to Texas Tech that probably again should have been a win instead of a loss, and they came out of the bye and won a couple of games. So maybe this does come again at a good time for them.
Ohio State snuck past Nebraska at home 21-17 on Saturday. The Buckeyes will play at number 3 Penn State at noon on Saturday. So that's number 4 Ohio State at number 3 Penn State at noon on Saturday. They avoid the nighttime whiteout at Penn State. So I know Buckeye fans are happy about that. Are you surprised that Ohio State is a 3.5-point favorite going into this Penn State game?
The only reason I'm not is because of recent history against Penn State. I think that's exactly what that number is. But
Agreed.
Man, I love the number with Penn State. I think they're, I want to doubt them because I think James Franklin is an ass, but I think they're really good. I mean, they're good on defense. Their quarterback makes plays. I know you can probably look back and say, well, they had a scare against Bowling Green. Okay, but they survived it. This just feels like a tough spot for Ohio State because honestly, right now, offensively, they looked funky in that game.
Do you think the offensive struggles are all about the offensive line? They had the left tackle injury there. They weren't deep or talented at that spot to begin with. That was the big concern going in. Or are there other concerns there that they're not a more prolific offense at this point?
No, because they didn't run it worth a damn, and they got 2 good running backs. I mean, we've seen them when they've had a chance to run that they're both good backs. I think Will Howard's done a nice enough job. He's had an issue here and there, a hiccup here or there, but he's still been fine. And again, you're not going to be great offensively every week. You were still the Oregon loss probably lingered a little bit. You had obviously then Ryan Day taking over the play calling on defense. So you had a few things that were a little bit wonky going into this game, but even through that, it just didn't look good. And now you're going to go to Penn State and they're playing really well. And yeah, I know you've owned them, but this just doesn't feel right.
Well, just the issue of the offensive line going up against this Penn State defensive front is a legitimate concern for Ohio State. So I get why there'd be some angst going into this game. The fan base for Ohio State seems to have changed their tune quickly. Like a few weeks ago, it was anyone who doesn't think we're going to win the national championship is an idiot and doesn't know ball. And now it's like, this team is in real trouble. We may not win another game or something. So how concerning is the last 2 games, one of which is a 4-point win over Nebraska, and the other, which is a 1-point loss on the road to the number 1 team in the nation?
Yeah, and I got no qualms with the 1-point loss to the loss to Oregon. I mean, they're good. I mean, again, those 2 teams play 10 times even there. I think Ohio State wins half of those battles. Put them on a neutral field. I think Ohio State wins 7 or 8 of those battles, for goodness sakes. But the Nebraska game, and again, maybe there was the lingering hangover. Maybe it was the change in the defensive situation, the issues up front offensively. Maybe those all were confluence, and maybe those all get washed away because it is Penn State. And maybe it's because, hey, you know what? It's the natural letdown of it's just Nebraska, and maybe that's the case. And maybe the fact that it is Penn State gets the juices flowing a little bit more. But I think this Penn State team is built a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun game to watch on Saturday at noon. Kentucky lost at home to Auburn 24-10 last weekend. They play at Tennessee on Saturday at 7:45. I have nothing left to say about this Kentucky team other than what an utter disaster of a season for them. 3 straight losses following that huge win at Ole Miss, where it felt like maybe they would turn things around, and it's just been really disheartening for a UK fan base. No question.
And the problem with this is this was a year that you had very favorable SEC home schedule. You had a pretty favorable SEC schedule overall. I say that despite the fact that they had to go to Ole Miss, which, they won, and they have to go to Texas and still Tennessee this coming week. All 3 on paper were tough games, but you had a favorable, and you still looks like they're going to come up short of bowl eligibility. And then you look and go, what next? I mean, where do we go from here? And I think that's the thing that's probably the most disheartening of, this looked like a year where you kind of right the ship a little bit, get yourself to 8 or 9 wins, feel good about the direction of the program. And instead, it feels like the program's going backwards by giant leaps and strides. And is Mark Stoops the guy to fix it?
And that's the question that I think will be continually asked from now until the end of the season and even into the offseason.
Yep.
So let's get into our pick 'em. Last week, you were 4-4, putting you at 32-28. I was 2-6, 27-33. Now, just having a rough year with these local teams. But Skinny, our best bet, Notre Dame beat Navy 51-14. Can you tell me whether or not that's enough to cover 12.5? Or
hang on a second. If you
carry the one,
can I take it to the 10th power?
You can if you want. I still don't think it's going to be enough to save your best bet from last week. I trust you. Let's make a rule now that you're not going to pick against Notre Dame in your best bet segment anymore, because you've swung and missed twice badly on that.
And I tried to change that pick, Rick, and I'll be honest with you, I was going to try to change it to Ole Miss laying 20.5, and they didn't cover that number either. So I was doomed no matter which way I went with the best bet of the week.
That's right. All right, let's cruise through these because we've been going long. Saturday at noon, we've got Ohio State 3.5-point favorites at Penn State. The total is 45.5.
I'll go Penn State 23-20. I think they get the outright win.
23-20, you said?
23-20.
23-20, so that is Penn State and the under. I am on the exact opposite side of this. I'm going Ohio State 27, Penn State 21, Ohio State in the over. I have no reason to do this other than the fact that there's the recent history. They own Penn State.
They do.
And I've been in this pretzel this year of where like a team screws me, so then I pick the opposite way on them next week. Like I pick against them, fade them, and then they have a big win. So it's like I'm not going to chase. I'm just going to stay on the Ohio State bandwagon and hope they get it right. Saturday at 7:30, we've got Kentucky at Tennessee. The Vols are a 16.5-point favorite. The total is 45.5.
Yeah, I'll go Tennessee 41, Kentucky 16. I don't think it. I think the defense is at the stage of saying to hell with all this. They don't even. They're still making decisions on the quarterback, and to me, it really doesn't matter because they all stink at this moment. I mean, I guess I'd like to see Cutter Boley at some point, but what a tough place to, if you're going to go play a bunch of snaps, go have to do that. I think Tennessee just dominates this game. I'm discouraged.
We're on the same side of this one as well. I think Tennessee could put up close to that total by themselves, by the way. I'm going to go 35-14 Tennessee in the over for me as well, but I really like the over in that game just because I don't think Kentucky's defense is enough to bring down totals anymore, especially against a competent offense like this.
Yep. Then
Sunday at 1, we've got the Raiders at the Bengals. Bengals are a 7.5-point favorite. The total is 46.5.
Yeah, I'll go Bengals 27-17. This Raiders offense, it's literally Brock Bowers and a bunch of checkdowns. They don't have much at wide receiver. They don't run it very well. They turn it over a bunch. They're not great defensively. Yeah, they got Max Crosby. This is a good landing spot, in my opinion, off of Philly for the Bengals that they get this win. I'm not here to tell you that gives me great optimism for the next couple of weeks on the road. But for this game, I just think they're the better team. And I know they've been that a couple of times at home this year and lost. But again, this feels like the right landing spot for them to bounce back.
I think they will win, but I don't think this defense is capable of covering more than a touchdown. I'm going to say Bengals 27, Raiders 24. So Raiders and the over for me. And that brings us to our best bet of the week. What do you got for me, Skinny?
All right, so as much as I've gone against Notre Dame and it's bit me in the ass, I'm going back to the Fighting Illini. I'm technically 3-0. I'm going to take them again twice this week. Look them up, Rick. I believe they're a 1.5-point underdog at home to Minnesota. So I'm taking the Fighting Illini and the money line. I'm taking them both. I'm 3-0 with a money line win against Michigan. I had them earlier in the year. They're my guys. I'm going back to the Fighting Illini.
So they're a 1.5-point favorite. You're going to take them.
Oh, they are a 1.5-point favorite. Okay.
I'm asking you. I didn't look it up.
No, I think they're a 1.5-point dog at home.
Oh, dog. Okay. I thought you said favorite. My fault. No. So Illinois, they are a 2.5-point dog, Skinny. Even better.
All right. Let's go, Fighting Illini. Get me back on track.
Plus 2.5 and also money line for the Fighting Illini. I'm going to be in the Big Ten as well. I'm going to go Indiana minus 7.5 at Michigan State. I know why. I get it. I know why this line is where it's at. But Skinny, this Indiana team is 2 touchdowns better than Michigan State. They are maybe 3 or 4. Like,
yeah. Michigan State though has at least played competently at home. I just don't know if Indiana doesn't feel like it's had that week yet where it's had a setback of any kind. And I think they're good. I mean, now the situation at quarterback, is Curtis Rourke back playing this week or not? I don't know the answer to that.
I think that's still up in the air.
I know the kid that replaced him did a nice job, obviously, against Washington. They rolled up plenty of points, but man, if you could give,
I know it's putting a lot of faith in Indiana, but I think they're at least 2 touchdowns better. That number is just crazy low. I mean,
I do
for these two teams.
I could see Indiana escaping with like a 24-20 win in that one.
I think Vegas agrees with you, but that's why I'm picking against them. And the other thing I really like, and maybe you parlay this, and maybe you just think this is the better bet overall. Take a look at the total in the Air Force at Army game. It's the total is 40.5. I love the over there. I think Army might score 40 themselves in this game. Air Force is horrible.
I didn't see the total, but I did see the line was like 22 or 23. Army the favorite. And to your point, I think Army scores 37 and Air Force probably finds a way to sneak out a touchdown or 10 points or something. Yeah, I think that that's well within reason to take that.
Yeah, that 40.5 is just such a low number in any college football game.
I think with the service academies, I think we still get stuck in all they're going to do is run the wishbone, and it's going to be 13-10, and sometimes it is. And hell, this game could certainly turn out to be that way. But this Air Force defense isn't very good.
That's the thing. Air Force is dragging this down because they won't score, but Army will. The Army will run up a ton on them.
Yeah, but again, they'll find a way to score some points somehow, some way. In my opinion, it won't be very much. And to the other point, Army will get more than enough. And if they listen, if Air Force doesn't, you're going to probably leave Army in some short fields that they're going to roll up 40 on their own.
That's right. All right, let's get into some Ask Skinny Anything. If you could instantly become an expert at any skill, what would it be and why?
Expert at any skill, man. That's a great question. I've never thought about being an expert in anything. Expert in any skill. Molecular science and find a way to cure cancer.
I mean, that's a pretty noble cause.
I mean, I'm trying to figure out what else would you want? What else could I be an expert in?
I think I'd just go something like finances.
Yeah.
Just to understand, because I'm so lost when it comes to anything to do with that. And I'm not even interested. I don't even want to know. I just wish I could snap my fingers and instantly know what I'm supposed to do.
My cause is far more noble than you greedy son of a gun.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. I'm in it for myself 100%. I'm just trying to make my life slightly more convenient at tax time or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. If you were a high school football player today, I'm assuming a highly recruited prospect as well. Yeah. What program or coach would you want to play for the most?
That's a good one. Honestly, I kind of like Josh Heupel. He just seems like just a dude that enjoys doing what he's doing, and guys play hard for him. I hate to do that. I'm a Kentucky grad, and I'm picking Tennessee. What am I doing?
I don't hate that. I mean, Kirby Smart seems like just a pretty solid dude, and you win a ton there, right? I mean,
and you can go commit crimes, and he doesn't seem to mind.
Yeah,
so that's a good call. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I like a player's coach. Yeah, a guy that has my back. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with this, Skinny. Rank the following iconic mustaches, which I gave you ahead of time.
I've got one more list as well to do after this one, so let's do this one first. Yours first.
So we got 2 lists then.
Yes.
Rank the following iconic mustaches. Did you do it by mustache or by career of the people who own the mustache?
No, I kind of did it by mustache, and people can correct me if I'm wrong. So I'll start from the bottom, right?
Okay.
Number 10 was David Crosby. I mean, that thing was just unkept. Was it not? It just looked like...
Who's David Crosby?
Crosby Stills and Nash.
I don't know that.
Oh, my gosh. Can you Google him for yourself just so you can see how unkept the mustache is?
This is it's one of those that go like this.
Yeah, it's just unkept.
Yeah, it's
number 9 was Freddie Mercury, because even though it wasn't a peach fuzz mustache, it just looked like the one we all started off with in high school, right? Where you had the peach fuzz, you weren't quite ready to shave it. It looked just grotesque. And then eventually you shaved for the first time and got the peach fuzz off. I know his wasn't a peach fuzz mustache, but it kind of had that vibe to me.
That's a terrible look. I can't grow facial hair at all. I always say I look like a 14-year-old kid here in Newport whenever I grow out my hair for grow my facial hair for longer than 3 days.
I think it was my 8th grade picture. Somehow I had the peach fuzz in it. It just looks, I just hate looking back at it. It was just awful.
The dirt stash.
Yeah, correct. All right, number 8 on this list, I got Geraldo Rivera. It's just too much. It's just too much of a mustache for me. It doesn't seem like it. I guess it works for him, but it's too much for me with him.
Yeah, it looks ridiculous. I mean, over the top.
Number 7, I got Eddie Murphy. Because I never just anyway, it's not like Eddie Murphy's mustache stands out to me for Eddie Murphy. I don't know what that, you know what I mean? It's not like I think of Eddie Murphy and think
but
mustache.
At the same time, he's got to have it. I mean,
I know, but it just, I don't know. It doesn't.
It's a strong stash, but it's not like iconic because of the stash.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Number 6 is Alex Trebek. I mean, he's got to be at least in the middle of the pack of this list. And you're wondering, holy cow, there's five above him? Well, by God, there are. Raleigh Fingers comes in at number 5. It was goofy. The handlebar was crazy, but he pulled it off. I mean, for whatever reason, he pulled that off.
Yep. That was good.
I don't know if anybody else can. Number 4, Wilford Brimley. I mean, listen, he had kind of one of those big, goofy, bushy mustaches, but he's not Wilford Brimley without that mustache, man.
I've got to see who the top 2 guys are if he's not number 1.
And he's number 4 on my list. I mean, number 3, Burt Reynolds stash. I mean, back in my day, everybody wanted to be Burt Reynolds and have the Burt Reynolds stash. I mean, they just did.
I got Brimley ahead of him. Go ahead. Who's your top 2?
Tom Selleck, man. Tom Selleck was the mustache. That's why I grew my mustache back in my day, bro. It was Tom Selleck as Magnum P.I.
Fair enough. That's tough to beat. You're right. Just looking at it, that's a sexual icon right there.
And number 1, beef. It's what's for dinner. Sam Elliott, man. Sam Elliott's stash just makes Sam Elliott Sam. He's a dude. Beef. It's what's for dinner.
Damn, the top 4 of that list is really strong. Those are strong mustaches.
I know it.
I still think Wilford Brimley is number 1.
No, I think this is a great question. I really do. I don't know why I love it. I guess because I talked about mustaches recently, whatever. But I think that's tremendous in my opinion. You know what you should have done if you were a good co-host / producer, you would have found my Bowling for TV Dollars or whatever the hell it was show I hosted with me and a mustache.
Damn it, I have that somewhere.
I know you do. That's what I was expecting. I was waiting. Yeah, the Wilford Brimley stash it is terrific. He's not Wilford Brimley without it. He just isn't.
No, he's not. Oh, God, you're right. I totally screwed up by not having your bowling stash on here.
Yeah.
Well, all right, what's the other list that you have?
Okay, and so this was from George, who sent a list earlier this year, and he sent this one last week, and I just overlooked it, and it was based on the Reds hiring a new manager, hiring Terry Francona, and he said he wondered if I could rank the worst to best managers the Reds have had since Pete Rose, based on how they did with the players they had at the time, and he said he leaves out the interim managers, which is Pete McCannon's one of those, and Tony Perez because he barely got to manage. So here's my list in reverse order, 10-1. The manager since Pete Rose that at least had some seasons. Number 10 was Ray Knight. I thought he was horrible. Horrible. Number 9, David Bell. I think he did less with more, to be honest with you. He had some good enough rosters to do more with, did he not?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Number 8 was Brian Price, only because he just was dealt a terrible hand.
He had no shot.
None.
Yeah.
And I also never won 70 games, I don't believe. So maybe I could switch him and David Bell. Bob Boone comes in at number 7. Again, didn't do much with much. There's a big drop off after the top 3, actually maybe top 4. Number 6, Dave Miley. I like Dave Miley. I just don't know if he ever got a real fair shot. Number 5, Jerry Narron, the baseball guy. Jerry did okay. He was a baseball guy. We're going to hit, Marty. We're going to hit. But Jerry didn't have great rosters.
I don't really remember the Jerry Narron era very well.
Yeah, it was forgettable.
Yeah.
Number 4, Jack McKeon. He did take him to a playoff. You can't discount that, the 95 playoff.
Did he go to the Marlins right after?
Close to it, yeah. Close to it. After I think he stole Ken Griffey Jr.'s bats in the locker room. Number 3, Dusty Baker. And you're thinking, woo, Dusty Baker only at number 3? My top 3 are pretty jumbled in my opinion. I probably, if I had the guts, I'd flip my top 2. Number 2, Davey Johnson. I think Davey Johnson is one of the best managers in baseball history, and he's done it at numerous places. Marge just didn't personally like Davey Johnson, which is why Davey Johnson lost his job. And number 1, Lou Piniella. I mean, he did lead him to a World Series title after all. And actually, 2 seasons later, they won 92 games, I believe, that season. So 2 of his 3 seasons, they won 90-plus games in a World Series title. That's pretty good in a short window.
That was a good list. That was a good question. Whoever brought that up.
Question. See? Yeah, I like that. I like the list. But it's a big, honestly, it's a huge drop off from Dusty to Jack McKeon. And it's an even bigger drop off from Jack McKeon to Jerry Narron. We're going to hit, Marty.
The bottom of that list from Narron on is pretty rough.
Yeah, it is pretty rough.
All right. To wrap up our podcast, there it is.
Found it. There it is.
There it is.
And my guy Doug Martin from Super Bowl had the mustache too. I first see that was the era though, man. That's when you had to have a mustache. If you were anybody, you had a mustache. That, believe it or not, is probably 24, 25-year-old me. There I am.
Looking good. You're only 24 or 25 in that picture?
Yeah.
You look 37. That mustache aged you a bit.
How the hell do I look now, for goodness sakes, then? Like I'm 80?
Better. You look better now. Honestly, you don't look that much older in this picture than you do there with that stash. That stash was not a good look for you in terms of age.
Man,
it aged you a bit.
It's in all my wedding photos, Rick.
Your wife wanted an older man, apparently. She wanted a mature guy in her life.
But you could just see, but both of us have that. I mean, that's what back in that era, man, you had to have the, if you were anybody, you had the stash guy.
Yeah, I was glad I was able to recover that quickly there and get that wonderful timeless classic picture of you and your mustache up.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
For the people on YouTube.
Yes, exactly. All right. Good stuff as always. Thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. We'll be back next week. We'll be into the college basketball season. NFL keeps rolling along. Bengals have a short week next week with a Thursday night game in Baltimore, but we will have a podcast for you next week at some point as well. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly Potpourri edition, presented by Blake, the Attorney Maislin.